Sarah's life before that Tuesday in October was a study in beige. Her apartment walls, her wardrobe, even the lukewarm coffee she sipped at her desk all seemed to blend into a single monotonous shade of predictability. She worked as a data analyst, a job that rewarded order and quiet compliance, two qualities she possessed in abundance. Her days were neat columns of numbers, and her nights were quiet evenings spent with a book she rarely finished. There was a persistent, low-level hum of dissatisfaction she could never quite place. It was the feeling of standing on the shore, watching ships sail toward the horizon, while her own feet were cemented in the sand. Friends would describe her as steady and reliable, but she secretly yearned for a jolt, a disruption, something that would crack the smooth veneer of her existence and reveal a different path she had not yet considered taking. She often walked home through the older industrial part of the city, a shortcut she knew was ill-advised after dark. But the decaying brickwork and graffiti-covered walls felt more alive than her sterile office environment. It was a small, almost imperceptible rebellion against the safety she had so carefully constructed around herself. In these moments, she felt a flicker of something adventurous, a ghost of the person she might have been in another life. This routine, this quiet act of defiance, was the only unpredictable element in her world. She never felt truly in danger, shielded by a naive belief that nothing truly bad could ever happen to her. The world of chaos and violence was something that happened on the news, to other people in other cities. Her life was a carefully balanced equation, and she saw no reason why it would ever be thrown into disarray so suddenly. That evening, however, the sky was a bruised purple, and a chilling wind swept through the empty streets, rattling loose corrugated iron on the old warehouses. The usual hum of distant traffic was absent, replaced by an unnerving silence. It was a silence that felt heavy, a curtain waiting to be pulled back, revealing the stark and terrifying reality that her world was about to be irrevocably shattered. The attack was brutally sudden, a violent rupture in the fabric of her quiet reality. Two figures emerged from the deep shadows of an alleyway, their movements swift and predatory. There was no negotiation, no warning, just the cold, hard reality of being shoved against a brick wall. The rough texture scraped her cheek as a hand clamped over her mouth, muffling her scream into a choked gasp of pure, unadulterated terror. Panic seized her, a cold wave that paralyzed her limbs and clouded her thoughts. Her purse was torn from her shoulder, its contents spilling onto the grimy pavement. The world narrowed to a terrifying pinprick of vision, the glint of a knife under the faint glow of a distant streetlight, the menacing whispers demanding more than she had. Time seemed to warp, stretching and compressing in a horrifying rhythm of her own frantic heartbeat, just as a profound sense of finality began to wash over her. A new motion blurred at the edge of her vision. A figure, darker than the surrounding shadows, moved with an impossible speed. There was a short, violent struggle, a symphony of grunts, the sickening thud of impact, and a cry of pain that was not her own. In a matter of seconds, her attackers were gone, vanishing back into the darkness from which they came. She was left slumped against the wall, trembling uncontrollably, her mind struggling to process the whirlwind of events. A hand, strong but gentle, rested on her shoulder. She looked up into a pair of kind, worried eyes, in a face she couldn't fully discern in the gloom. He helped her to her feet, his voice calm and reassuring as he asked if she was okay. He gathered her scattered belongings with quiet efficiency. He stayed only until he saw the first flashing lights of a distant police car, summoned by an unseen neighbor. He pressed her wallet back into her shaking hands, uttered a final, "You're safe now," and then simply melted back into the shadows. He saved her life, then vanished without a trace, leaving behind only the ghost of a memory and a profound, life-altering mystery that would come to define her future. In the sterile, fluorescent-lit environment of the hospital and later the police station, Sarah recounted the story again and again. Each telling felt more surreal, as if she were describing a scene from a movie she had once watched. The details of her attackers were hazy, lost in the fog of fear, but the memory of her rescuer was paradoxically both vivid and vague. She remembered the feeling of his presence, but not the specifics of his face. The official investigation yielded nothing. There were no witnesses who got a clear look at him. The police praised the anonymous hero, but had no leads to follow, no name to attach to the brave act. To them, he was a ghost, a momentary vigilante who had disappeared as quickly as he. Arrived, the case was filed away, her stolen purse logged as evidence, and her trauma reduced to a few paragraphs in a police report. For Sarah, however, it was anything but closed. The incident had cracked her beige world wide open, and the man who pulled her from the wreckage was the only thing that felt real. His absence created a vacuum, a question that echoed in the newfound silence of her apartment. Who was he? Why did he help her? And why did he leave without a word, without a name, without any acknowledgement? She began her own investigation, driven by a need that transcended simple gratitude. It was an obsession born from a near-death experience. She revisited the alleyway a dozen times, at different hours of the day, hoping to jog a memory or find a clue she had missed. She searched for security cameras on nearby buildings, only to find them broken or pointing in the wrong direction, a series of frustrating dead ends. This phantom hero became the focal point of her life. The search for him was a search for meaning in the senseless violence she had endured. Finding him felt like the only way to reclaim the narrative of her own life, to turn a story of victimhood into one of purpose. The mystery of his disappearance was not just a puzzle to be solved. It was the only thing that kept the darkness at bay. The woman who returned to her data analysis job was not the same one who had left that fateful Tuesday. The neat columns of numbers no longer provided comfort. They felt like a cage. Her quiet compliance was replaced by a restless, burning energy. Sarah began a personal revolution, channeling all of her focus and resources into the singular mission of finding the man who had saved her. Her life now had a purpose beyond spreadsheets and reports. She started a social media campaign, creating a page titled "Finding the Angel of Elm Street." She wrote a detailed account of the attack and the rescue, carefully omitting certain police-sensitive details. She begged people to share the story, hoping it would reach someone who knew something, or perhaps even reach the man himself. The post went viral in her local community, a flurry of shares, comments, and well-wishes that offered comfort but no concrete leads. Her weekends were no longer quiet affairs. She spent them methodically canvassing the neighborhood around the alley. She printed flyers with a composite sketch she'd worked on with a forensic artist, a face pieced together from fragmented memories of kind eyes and a strong jawline. She spoke to shopkeepers, bartenders, and homeless individuals, anyone who might have seen something unusual that night, offering a small reward for any information. The search consumed her. She learned to read people, to ask the right questions, to be persistent without being pushy. The shy, retiring woman was gone, replaced by a determined investigator. She cross-referenced local news articles from the week of her attack, looking for any other unusual incidents. She spent hours in the public library, poring over old city maps and records, searching for anything that might give her an edge, a different angle. This relentless quest transformed her in ways she never could have anticipated. She was no longer a passive observer of her own life. She was the driving force, the protagonist in a story she was writing herself. While the object of her search remained a ghost, the pursuit itself was giving her a new identity, forging her into someone braver and more resilient than she ever thought possible. Months bled into a year, and the trail grew impossibly cold. The initial flood of social media support dwindled to a trickle, the messages of encouragement replaced by a deafening silence. Each hopeful lead turned into a dead end, another person who thought they knew something but was ultimately mistaken. The composite sketch on the flyers faded under the sun and rain, their corners peeling, becoming just another piece of forgotten paper on community bulletin boards. Sarah felt the heavy weight of obsession. Her friends, once supportive of her mission, now exchanged worried glances. They gently suggested that perhaps it was time to move on, to accept that her hero wanted to remain anonymous. They argued that she had been given a second chance at life and was spending it chasing a ghost from the past, a man who might not even want to be found. There were days when despair was a physical presence in her apartment. She would stare at the map of the city on her wall, dotted with pins marking every location she had investigated, and feel nothing but the crushing emptiness of failure. The question why shifted from being about him to being about herself. Why couldn't she let it go? Was she simply unable to accept the randomness of the event, the terrifying idea that it was all just chance? The beige life she once led seemed like a distant, peaceful memory. This new existence was a chaotic cycle of hope and disappointment. She quit her data analysis job, unable to feign interest in its sterile logic, and took a part-time job at a coffee shop to pay the bills, freeing up more time for her search. Her singular focus was alienating those closest to her, building a wall between her and the world she was once a part of. The silence from her hero was the most profound puzzle. If he was a good man, why would he not want to know she was okay? The narrative she had built around him, a humble, selfless protector, began to fray at the edges. A darker thought crept in. Perhaps he had his own reasons for staying in the shadows, reasons that had nothing to do with humility at all. Just as Sarah was about to concede, to pack away the maps and delete the social media page, a single, insignificant detail from the night of the attack fought its way to the surface of her memory. It happened while she was cleaning out an old box, and her fingers brushed against a small, tarnished silver locket, a piece of jewelry she hadn't worn in years. The cold metal against her skin triggered something deep within her subconscious. She remembered the chaos after he had saved her as he was gathering her things from the pavement. Her purse had been torn, and he had quickly stuffed everything he could find back inside. In that frantic moment, she now recalled a faint metallic clicking sound. It was the sound of something small and hard hitting the asphalt, a sound she had dismissed at the time as a stray coin or a button. But now, she remembered seeing him pause for a fraction of a second, his head tilted as if he heard it too, before he was distracted by the approaching sirens. He had been focused on her safety, on getting away before the police arrived. Could he have dropped something of his own? The thought was a spark in the darkness, a flicker of renewed hope that ignited her investigative spirit once more. Armed with this fragile new lead, she returned to the alley, this time with a powerful flashlight and a new sense of purpose. She wasn't looking for witnesses anymore. She was looking for a ghost's lost possession. She spent hours on her hands and knees, meticulously searching every crack and crevice in the grimy pavement, combing through the debris that had collected against the brick walls and under a rusted drain pipe. After nearly giving up, her flashlight beam caught a faint glimmer. Tucked deep within a crack in the concrete, almost completely obscured by dirt and grime, was a small object. It was a custom-made St. Christopher medal, the kind a person would receive as a deeply personal gift. On the back, etched in tiny, worn letters, was a set of initials, DM, and a date from over 20 years ago. The initials and the date were the first tangible clues she had in over a year. It was not much, but it was infinitely more than nothing. Sarah's research skills, once applied to market trends, were now focused on a far more personal dataset. She began cross-referencing public records, obituaries, and archived news, searching for anyone with the initials DM connected to that specific date. The search was vast and daunting, a digital needle in a haystack. Her persistence finally paid off when she found a small newspaper announcement from 2 decades prior. It was a birth announcement for a Daniel Miller, born on the exact date engraved on the medal. A wave of adrenaline washed over her. With a name, the ghost began to take form. Further searching led her to a more recent address, a modest suburban house on the other side of town, a place far removed from the gritty alley where their paths had crossed. With a heart pounding in her chest, she drove to the address. It was a quiet street, with well-tended lawns and children's bicycles left on the sidewalk. She rehearsed what she would say 100 times, but the words felt clumsy and inadequate. She walked up to the door and rang the bell, half expecting Daniel Miller himself to answer, the man with the kind, worried eyes from her memory. Instead, the door was opened by a woman in her late 50s, her face etched with a gentle sadness. When Sarah, stammering, explained why she was there and presented the St. Christopher Medal, the woman's eyes filled with tears. She invited Sarah inside and led her to a mantelpiece covered in photographs. And there he was, a smiling young man in a paramedic's uniform, Daniel Miller, her savior. The woman was his mother. She explained that Daniel had been a paramedic for 10 years, a man who dedicated his life to helping others. Then, her voice breaking, she pointed to the largest photograph. It was of Daniel, but dated just 3 weeks after the night he had saved Sarah. Daniel Miller had been killed in a tragic ambulance accident while responding to an emergency call. He never got to tell anyone his story. Standing in a stranger's living room, surrounded by the memories of a man she never truly knew, Sarah finally understood. Daniel's disappearance wasn't an act of mysterious intent. It was a consequence of a life lived for others, a life cut tragically short. He had vanished not to hide, but because he was simply gone from the world. The story of how he saved her life, then vanished without a trace, was not a mystery to be solved, but a final, heroic chapter in a life of service. His mother explained that the St. Christopher Medal had been a gift from her on his 18th birthday, his most cherished possession. She had been heartbroken, believing it was lost in the ambulance crash. Sarah returned the medal to her, a small piece of a hero coming home. In sharing her story, she gave Daniel's mother one last tale of her son's bravery, a gift of memory that brought both tears and a profound sense of peace. Sarah left that house a different person. The restless obsession that had driven her for so long was gone, replaced by a deep and quiet understanding. The search had never truly been about finding him, but about finding herself. In her relentless quest, she had unearthed her own strength, her own purpose, and her own courage. Daniel Miller had saved her life twice, once in the alley, and again by giving her a mission that forced her to become the hero of her own story. She eventually went back to school, studying to become a victim's advocate, using her experience to help others navigate the trauma she knew so well. The beige was gone from her life, replaced by a vibrant spectrum of empathy and purpose. She had found the answer to her question, and it was more complex and heartbreakingly beautiful than she could have ever imagined. His legacy was not in being found, but in the profound transformation he had inspired in her. The story of Daniel Miller serves as a powerful reminder of the silent heroes who walk among us, whose acts of kindness can ripple outward in ways they may never see. His courage did not end in that alley. It was reborn in the life Sarah chose to live. If this story has moved you, please consider subscribing to our channel and sharing your thoughts in the comments below. We believe that stories of transformation deserve to be heard.